Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next Cyber Security in Focus webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about PKI without the pain. It's going to be a series of industry updates, discussions about post-quantum PKI readiness, and more. So I'm Katie Watson, and I'll be your host today on behalf of Secon. If this is your first time joining us, a very, very warm welcome. Secon is a cybersecurity partner, and we're dedicated to helping organizations like yours tackle modern security challenges with confidence, clarity, and a human touch. So today, let's focus on the topic, which is PKI, Public Key Infrastructure. For many organizations, PKI feels like a complex and ever-shifting puzzle with frequent compliance changes, shortening certificate lifespans, and the emergence of quantum computing. But when managed correctly, PKI becomes a powerful, scalable foundation for secure communication and digital trust. So we're very lucky today to be joined by an expert, Martijn Katerbarg, a PKI expert with more than 15 years hands-on experience in web PKI, SSL, TSL, and signing certificates. Martijn brings a technical insight and a unique perspective of industry standards and compliance. So today we're going to explore how PKI industry updates are coming, what they mean for you, common pitfalls and best practices, and a lot more. So you're going to walk away with a really clear understanding of what effective PKI compliance looks like today. So just before we go into all of that, I'm just going to give some little bit of housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be shared with you afterwards. Now there's going to be a Q&A session at the end, so please feel free to submit questions throughout, and we're going to try answer as many as we can after the presentation. In the event that you don't get your question asked, or like me, you think of it half an hour after the webinar ended, please feel free to contact me at katie.watson@seconcyber.com. So without further ado, grab a coffee, get settled, and I'd like to hand over to Martijn, who is going to kick off with all the PKI knowledge.
Thank you very much, Katie. Let me share my screen. There we go. Hope that's visible for everyone. Navigating digital trust and PKI without the pain. We'll be going through a couple of industry updates. There's a lot happening in at least the public PKI domain, and some information on quantum PKI readiness for everyone to take along. So let's start with one of the big pain points of certificates. Let's dive right in. Certificates and the growing pace of them. A big pain of that is the sheer number of certificates that are out there. If we look back at around 2014, there were roughly 3 million certificates out there in the wild. With that, I mean publicly trusted TLS certificates, so the ones you would see on your website, for example. And since then, that number has almost been doubling year over year. 2023 was just under 300 million certificates. Our projections for 2024 puts it at over 500 million certificates. And again, that is just the public side and only TLS. I'm not taking into account SMIME or code signing certificates or private CA, which is a vast larger number. Essentially, certificates, they've become a commodity. But it's a critical one, and I don't think everyone gets that enough. A single expired certificate or revoked certificate can bring down an entire company or entire infrastructures. Outages, taking down such infrastructures, they happen to everyone, every company. Small businesses or large global tech companies alike. And here we have an overview. There is Cisco, LinkedIn, Starlink, Microsoft, Google. They all have had outages due to, in some cases, just a single expired certificate. As an example, Starlink had a downtime of several hours. Teams, even though there was a downtime of only a couple of minutes, the effects of that lasted for several hours for users across the globe, just because of caching and things like that. So even a short downtime can have pretty large side effects. And as we can see, things are about to get a lot more complicated with 47-day certificates. And that's not the only thing that is changing, but it is a large part of it, right? Certificate outages, we were talking about it already. The already increased number of certificates that are out there. Add to that a reduction in the maximum lifetime of certificates, which we'll be talking about a little bit more in one of the next slides, means the exponential increase of risk for outages within your infrastructure. And then long term, we have the threat of quantum certificates, post-quantum certificates, and quantum computers that, at least according to what we call Shor's algorithm, should be able to crack the keys we currently use for TLS certificates, which are RSA and ECC-based certificates. Before we dive into who and where these changes are coming from, I want to introduce the CA Browser Forum, which is a standards body. It's not an organization. It's a standards body consisting of browsers, or which we call root stores in general, and CAs such as us. The CA Browser Forum was founded over more than 10 years ago. Sectigo, back then under the name of Komodo, was one of the founding members. And within it, we set the guidelines for the issuance of TLS certificates, S-MIME certificates, and code signing certificates. And every CA, whether they are part of CA Browser Forum or not, have to adhere to those guidelines. And those guidelines are essentially enforced by the browsers. So we're talking about Apple has a root store for their iOS and Safari browser. Mozilla has the Mozilla root store, which they also call NSS, which trickles down quite a lot into Linux distributions, for example. Google has a Chrome root store program, and likewise Microsoft has the Microsoft root store. There are several others. There is Cisco, there is Opera, there are several others, but these are essentially the four big ones. And all of them require that if a CA wants their root certificate included, which is the highest level of certificates, everything that is issued by those certificates needs to adhere to those guidelines. And what CA Browser Forum does is essentially the root stores, browsers, and CAs alike set those guidelines. So there is a complete process of a CA can bring forward a ballot, a proposal to which all of the organizations then have a chance to vote on. And in general, if there is a majority of votes in favor of such a proposal, it will be adopted and become part of the standard itself. So one of the largest changes that was recently done is the reduction in certificate lifespans. Little bit of history on this one. Back in 2020, the maximum term for public certificates was dropped down from 2 years to 398 days. That is a year and a month, roughly. And as of February 2023, Google brought forward their moving forward together roadmap, which is, as I said, a roadmap with their intent of everything they want to change within public TLS certificates in the next several years. One of those items was the reduction of maximum validity from 398 days to just 90 days. That was one of their priorities, but not the highest one, so that hasn't happened yet. However, back in October of 2023, Apple actually proposed a even shorter maximum lifetime at the CA Browser Forum, gradually reducing it to 47 days. By 2028 was the original intent. That proposal has been voted on, in fact, last week. Just last Friday, that proposal was adopted by the CA Browser Forum. The final proposal put the 47-day limit in 2029 after discussions with CAs and browsers. But let me present the actual timeline that we are looking at. So already in less than 1 year from now, March 15th, 2026, is when the maximum lifetime for publicly trusted TLS certificates will be going down to 200 days as a maximum. And I expect most CAs will go a bit shy on that one and just, for example, what we usually do is prepare such a change a month in advance. Then another year later, by March 15th, 2027, the maximum will go down to 100 days. To then another 2 years later, drop at 47 days. Interestingly enough, that is not even what we would call short-lived certificates yet. Short-lived certificates are a type of certificate that would live for 10 days or less. That concept already exists. We do expect that in the further future, past 2029, there may be follow-ups reduction in the maximum allowed time. But yeah, 47 is where we're at for now. The advantage of short-lived certificates is that they essentially do not require any type of revocation services. Revocation services, those are either what we call CRLs or OCSP, are currently required. One of the two has to be supported for every issued certificate. But CAs and browsers are sort of migrating away from the OCSP protocol due to privacy concerns. And even CRLs are not a perfect solution. So short-lived certificates, they take away privacy concerns and essentially any option for CA to have to revoke such a certificate and publish that data. And looking onto certificate lifespans a bit more broadly, TLS is not the only one that is going down. SSL has been valid for, if we look back 10 years, could be issued for 10 years, then went down to 5, 3, 2, 1, and now 47 days. Code signing is currently set at a maximum of 3 years. And for this, Microsoft has actually proposed already a reduction down to 15 months in total. SMIME will be going down from 3 to 2 years in June of this year. And subordinate CAs, which essentially are the CAs that issue your identity certificates, are expected to go down from 15 years down to 3 years in the future. One of the big reasons for that is encouraging automation and reducing usage of certificate pinning, which is something that we see a lot in the wild still, but strongly recommend against. Now, what are the advantages of short-lived certificates or shorter certificate lifespans? One is a reduced risk window. Many companies don't realize this, but CAs, in many cases, have to revoke your certificate within either 24 hours or 120 hours. That's 5 days. And that can happen for many reasons. CAs make mistakes sometimes. Just last year, I believe roughly 100,000 certificates were revoked due to mistakes made by various CAs. Some were done within 24 hours, some were done within 120 hours. On the other hand, there are personnel that make mistakes as well. Customers, we see almost on a daily basis, we see key compromises where, for example, employees have added a private key of a TLS certificate to a GitHub repository that's been made public, or they pasted in the wrong form. We as a CA, the moment we see such a private key in the wild, we will revoke your certificate or any certificate associated with that private key instantly. It has a side effect that, yes, it might bring your infrastructure down, but it protects every relying party in the world by doing that. Second one is crypto agility. If we look at, again, several years ago, a move from the SHA-1 to SHA-2 protocol, hashing algorithm, took many years, way too long in hindsight. And we have a post-quantum era coming up. So crypto agility is very important in this day and age. Furthermore, encouraging automation, right? This ties kind of into number 1 and 2. If the CA revokes your certificate and you have to manually go in and replace it, you might not be able to do that within 24 hours. But if you have automation in place, you might not even notice the certificate has been replaced. That's how automation should be working. And also the better marriage of domain control to certificates. So the other thing that will be going down in reuse data is domain control. Currently, CAs, if you, for example, order a certificate, say today, and want to issue a renewal in a year's time, the CA is allowed to reuse your domain control that you performed today once more. That they can do that for up to 398 days. That means that by the time that second certificate expires, more than 2 years will have gone since you've proven you have control over that domain name. That lifetime is actually going down gradually as well, down from the 398 days down to only 10 days in the future, on the same timeline as we saw in this slide. And the future of that may even be a per certificate domain control, which would be something that is automatable already with protocols like Acme. And I do believe maybe the future of issuance for certificates. Then tying on to the crypto agility, the quantum reality, and the critical risk of 2030. NIST, the United States standards body, has said that current algorithms, RSA and ECC, shouldn't be used past 2030, and organizations have to be ready by 2030. And there is already a risk with what we call the harvest now, decrypt later attacks. That is, for example, if you have data that might be encrypted now with algorithms that are not quantum safe, you already need to verify now if you have such data that if it's stolen today, yet decrypted in 5 or 10 years' time, what kind of risk is your organization looking at, right? Is there customer data in there that will, in 10 years' time, provide a privacy risk? Is there IP, intellectual property, that you may have that if it falls into the wrong hands, even in 10 years' time, your company suffers a severe issue? Those are things you need to start looking for. Like I said, NIST has standardized on some algorithms for post-quantum. We've seen them on screen here. Won't bore you too much with the names at this point. MLChem and MLDSA, however, are the ones that we will mainly see for the issuance of certificates in the future. So with that standardization essentially done at this point, it's now up to other parties. That is the IETF, which sets standards for essentially the internet. It is up to roots programs such as Microsoft, Apple, to make sure they support such algorithms in their operating systems and in their browsers, that they allow the use of those. It's up to CA Browser Forum to make sure that they allow the issuance of certificates that use these algorithms. Same with ETSI, which is a European body for EIDAS. And vendors. For example, even if all of the previous ones have done their thing at this point, at current, there are no HSM vendors that have a HSM ready that is both quantum, well, that supports quantum algorithms and has the required FIPS certification that we SCAs need to be using. So there's a lot going on. Still a lot needs to happen. But yeah, don't just wait until all of those parties do what they need to do. Every organization needs to look at it. That's why we from Sectigo have a strategic blueprint called Quant, meaning that you need to make sure you have your quantum exposure inventory ready, right? Get a clear view of your cryptographic assets and what would be the damage if that, even in 10 years' time, gets disclosed. Uncover the risk you may have with that, and based on that risk, prioritize which data needs to be further protected first beyond other items. Assess and strategize how you want to do that. Leverage our PKI experience to develop a essentially PQC migration strategy. Navigate such an implementation. Make sure you seamlessly integrate with the automation we have available for such items. and track and manage so you can stay agile on not just what you have right now, but what may come further. What we see a lot is, for example, the IT department manages all the certificate, and then someone in a different certificate for just a single website goes out and purchases their own certificate outside of the view of those who actually should be managing. It's important to get a clear look on that. We'll get a little bit more into that in one of the later slides. And then I think that's not enough. There's more changes. The Chrome root store is one that is very active at this point. I'm going to go run through a couple of more changes, a bit more quickly. The removal of email domain control. So domain control is where you prove that you actually own the domain name for which you are requesting a certificate before we will issue you that certificate. But with a large focus on automation, methods like the HTTP file validation or DNS validation methods are on the rise, whereas email domain control, it is not really automatable. And that's why the new Chrome root store policy already says that CA should not be using those anymore. An important item to add here is that a lot of should, or in this case, should not, will become shall or shall not. So while they added this in their policy earlier this year, which was published in March, it may be very well possible that by next year, when they generally post a new update of their policy, that may be a shall not, which means at that stage, CAs are no longer allowed to use such a method. So that's the other part to take into account here. Even though CAs have to adhere to the CA browser forum guidelines, individual root stores can also have their, or not only can, they have their own guidelines. In general, those align with the CA browser forum, but there are some minute differences. That means that some root programs are slightly more strict, for example. CAs have to adhere to all of those in which they are included. So it's a big balancing act to make sure we're all compliant between what does the CA browser forum say, what does Chrome say, what does Microsoft say, and what does Apple say, and all of the other ones I'm not naming right now, to make sure we find the right flow. So email domain control, probably going away between now and the next few years is what I would expect. Then what we call MPIC, multi-perspective issuance corroboration, is something that has recently gone into effect. It doesn't have as big of an impact on customers themselves, more on the CAs themselves. But it is essentially a technology that prevents or detects and tries to prevent BGP hijacks during what we just discussed, the all-important domain control checking. So where originally a CA would only check the domain control from a single location in the world to, for example, your infrastructure. If a BGP hijack was to happen near the CA's infrastructure, a hacker could redirect that traffic and essentially take control of your domain from the CA's perspective. MPIC makes sure that CAs use more than just one perspective to check the domain control. And through that, it makes it almost impossible to perform BGP hijacks, since those attacks are fairly difficult. They are also very localized. So if a CA uses such a check from 3 or 6 different perspectives around the world on different continents, it is practically impossible to do a successful BGP hijack at that point. So it's a change that has a high security, increases security quite a lot. Then the next one would, gotta be honest, more impact than I would have liked. Removal of what we call client authentication. Client authentication is what we call an EKU, an extended key usage. And to not stay too much into jargon, an EKU is essentially a feature that a certificate has. So a code signing certificate will have an EKU with the name code signing. A email certificate has one that's called email protection. Server certificates, TLS certificates, have one that are called server authentication. But historically, the client authentication one has been added to both TLS and S/MIME certificates as an additional feature or an additional EKU. And we're seeing more and more problems because of that. To be short, it doesn't have any business being in a public certificate, because what we see a lot is that customers will use just the issuing CA as proof that if you have a certificate from the CA, you're allowed to log into my portal. But if it's a public certificate, anybody can get a certificate from that CA. So there's a lot of incorrect implementations. They have been the cause of quite a lot of delayed revocations in the past. And it's something that, as the slide says, it's a big yes for private CA. And we do see a larger shift in the use of private CA for essentially anything that really doesn't need to use public CA certificates. Public CA certificates have been almost misused due to convenience, where private CA is the real way that you should be doing that. And finally, shorter CA key lifetimes. So Mozilla and Chrome already have a policy nowadays that removes root certificates after 15 years. That is 15 years after their key was generated. And the latest Chrome root store policy update even recommended that CAs do a rollover of roots and thus use new keys every 5 years. So that's something that, again, pushes against the use of certificate pinning, which also we see a lot of issues with, especially on the public side, that we really want to stay clear from. So all of these changes, I get this is a lot. All of these changes will have a critical impact, because I hope everybody knows certificates are everywhere. They are on websites, they're on email servers, user authentications, signed software and documents, web services, hardware and firmware that is non-updatable in some cases have certificates. Firewalls, your car probably has certificates in them at this point. And again, we have a countdown to upgrade that cryptography. So the entire world has a lot to be doing. And that is a daily struggle with certificates, right? We're drowning in the renewals, and those are only going to get more when we decrease the maximum validity. There are resource drains, what we often hear. Enterprises already struggle in the current landscape, so yes, there's going to be a larger impact on that. And there are tools that enterprises really should be using at this. Going to get to that in a minute. Essentially, CLM, certificate lifecycle management. And there's a cost to the inaction as well of not using such a thing, right? We don't want to be replacing every certificate manually every 47 days. Risk of keep doing it manually or with outdated tools. The increased cost, increased chance of outages due to expired or revoked certificates, trickling down into direct financial loss or loss of customer trust in business, and the disadvantage in the market itself. So CLM, certificate lifecycle management, is really poised to be used to adapt to the shortening of certificate lifetimes. Helps you avoid those certificate-based outages. Prevents rogue certificates, right? If we see, I'm going to use marketing. Sorry if anyone here is for marketing. And marketing sets up a lovely, nice website that they need for a little while. They're like, we'll just do this and we'll put up a nice certificate. IT has no worry about it until that certificate expires, and marketing's like, whoops. CLM helps with that as well. It has the ability to go into your infrastructure and look for any certificate that it may encounter based on, agents that are able to actually crawl your servers, look for all your domain names, look for IP address ranges that you may use, and essentially collect every certificate it encounters and allows you to start managing those. Should help against the harvest now and decrypt later attacks, help you with legacy private CAs that you may have on Microsoft CAs, for example. Helps automatically replace certificates when there are misissuances or revocations due to compromises, due to CAs making mistakes, and get you ready for the new post-quantum era. So what we have is the concept of the 5 pillars of CLM that make sure you do your discovery, get your deployments in order, make sure your certificates are renewed automatically, make sure that if a revocation happens, there's automated replacements of those certificates, so revocations can happen without any downtime on your end, and make sure you have all those integrations in order. All of that to combine the visibility you need and to help you stay compliant. Again, it avoids the outages, can help prevent certain security breaches, not every, unfortunately, and even stay compliant, right? SOC 2, ISO, ISMS, they all rely on the usage of TLS certificates in one way or another. If you just have a web form with a contact form, for example, the only way to get that data to your own servers is by using an SSL connection, TLS connection. So GDPR plays a role in that too. And with the right initial setup, you should be able to, rather than have it be a resource drain, you have the time to save time and cost and those resources. And make sure that all your team members are able to use it at the right place. And finally, help you secure the right network with the right PKI. Right, we talked about this earlier, the use of private CA and public CA in the right location. Yes, your websites need a public CA certificate. Your SLIME, your emails also do, but internal applications, internal user access, client authentication, VPN access, where we see a lot of use of public CA at this point, all of that should be on private CA, which is something our CLM helps with as well. And those are secured in the same way as we protect our own public CAs. So with that, I think we'll open up for some questions if there are any.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Martin, for your time and all your wisdom. I feel like this is not an industry that you'd like if you don't like change, because there seems to be quite a lot of change. I actually didn't know about the harvest now, decrypt later attacks. So I just wanted to open the floor if anyone has any questions around PKI. And again, if you'd rather not discuss this in an open forum, please do feel free to send me an email, katie.watson@seconcyber.com, and I'll reach out to Martin and the team at Sectigo to get their expertise. And I think we do have time for a few questions. So I did have one as I was going through. I think what are the kind of the biggest mistakes you see, Martin, people make when it comes to certificate management and PKI?
The biggest thing we see currently is I'm hammering on it, but it's certificate pinning and using public CA where you should be using private, right? If you use, we see point of sales, point of sales devices that are not updatable externally, yet they are located throughout the entire country. You have a certificate that is if you're pinning to a certificate that might suddenly be revoked within 24 hours, you're not just going to have a bad day, you're going to have a bad drive throughout the entire country. Even if you have a large team to deal with that at a scale, with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of devices in some cases, that is not something you can manage in such a short time. And that's something we see, unfortunately, more and more as we are migrating to make sure you use the right PKI in the right location. All of those items are starting to pop up.
Yeah, brilliant. That does sound like that would be a very bad day. Could you please, and this is a question from Yusuf, could you please elaborate more on why/how public certs with client auth were misused?
Misused, well, partially due to that pinning. We do see customers that have their infrastructure again saying you have to use a certificate from this specific issuing GA to be able to log into us. Now, even if they have additional controls like making sure the common name is correct, making sure maybe an organization does this by the serial number of the certificate, nobody else might be able to get in. But the CA itself could change, could decide not to use that issuing GA anymore. At which point you would need to very quickly update your tooling to make sure that a different GA is allowed to be used. And with different GA, I don't mean a different organization, but we as Sectigo, for example, we have I think over 400 issuing GAs alone. Yeah, those can be switched off due to various reasons. In some cases, they're even revoked, at which point we really cannot use them anymore. And that's one of the bigger things we're seeing at this point.
Okay, fantastic. And then I think you spoke a lot about being ready for that 2030, which will probably creep up on us a lot faster than we can imagine. So when it comes to preparing for this change, where do you recommend someone starts?
Besides reaching out to us, I think making sure you know what you have. How important is it that certain data is still protected in, again, 5 to 10 years time? Because there will be a time if you've put up backups that maybe are encrypted, but you may have been ransomware. Your backups are in a threat actor's hands, but they're encrypted and he can't do anything with it. They might be able to do something with it in 10 years time due to the quantum threat.
I think that's something that, I didn't know beforehand, and it is very good to have on your radar because it's important to start now rather than wait until it's too late.
And that is why I believe the reduction to 47 days is an important one. It's kind of the sledgehammer approach almost, if you want to say it like that it forces the use of automation. It also gives IT departments the option to go to their senior management, right? What we see a lot is that there's no budget for automation of certificates because someone can just do it manually. It's a low priority in essence. But with that going down to 47 days, there is no other way than to automate it. And that, I hope, does help IT admins as well to make sure that they get to see that and then take that to the management to get resources they need to make such a change possible.
I think that's such an important point because if you're going to be drowning, if you manage a team and your team is going to be drowning in certificates and not able to do strategic work, or if you yourself are going to be drowning in certificate and not able to do strategic work, this shift and this change is really, a great way to approach management for that budget to make sure that you can start to use automation in a process that's, as Martin's explained throughout, is going to be very significant to keeping your operations up and running. So just wanted to check before we wrap up if anyone has any more questions. I think, Martin, you covered so much today, and there are a lot of changes coming. Perfect. If on that note, then, if you do think of something, please feel free to reach out to me. But I would like to thank Martin for his time and all the wisdom he shared, and Sectigo as well for putting together all this information to really help us navigate the changes happening in PKI. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.